TSA agent rips open black woman's suitcase, then finds out she's the airport owner. When Aisha Caldwell stepped into the TSA security line that brisk Tuesday morning, she had no idea her life was about to become front-page news. She was poised, successful, and dressed in the crisp elegance of someone who refused to shrink herself in the face of constant judgment. Yet behind the uniformed smile of TSA agent Randall J. McKenna lurked a hurricane of misdirected suspicion that would upend Aisha's day, her dignity, and her patience. Little did he know, the woman he was about to single out for an invasive search was no ordinary traveler. She was the new co-owner of the very airport itself. The crisp dawn air lingered outside Trinity Bay International Airport, a burgeoning travel hub located along the southeastern coast of the United States. It was affiliated with several major airlines, including Delta Airlines, making it a convenient alternative for travelers who couldn't or wouldn't trek to larger airports like Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International. Trinity Bay had recently been purchased and redeveloped by an investment group, one that included a powerful new majority partner, Aisha Caldwell. Aisha was an African-American entrepreneur renowned for her philanthropic endeavors and her uncanny ability to turn defunct or underperforming businesses into golden enterprises. The airport, with its outdated systems and unimpressive runways, had caught her eye months prior. After a string of negotiations, she officially became the principal investor, a title that, in simpler terms, made her the airport's owner. But that morning, she chose to travel incognito. She loved discreetly surveying the airport's day-to-day operations. It allowed her to see real problems without employees scrambling to put on their best faces. Security lines, staff courtesy, passenger comfort, these were the vital signs of an airport's overall health. Clad in a simple, elegant white blouse, a well-tailored pair of navy slacks, and comfortable but stylish flats, Aisha looked every bit the confident businesswoman. She wheeled a Samsonite suitcase behind her, the perfect balance of function and luxury. As she stepped through the automatic doors, the subtle hum of the terminal's early morning crowd enveloped her senses. Beeps of scanning devices, distant announcements echoing overhead, the pungent smell of fresh coffee wafting from a nearby cafe. Her plan was to catch a short flight to a neighboring state for a quick, face-to-face meeting with another potential business partner. Afterward, she intended to return by midday to meet with Trinity Bay's existing staff about upcoming renovations. Yet the moment she joined the security line, her instincts buzzed with an unmistakable tingle of caution. The lines were moving slowly, so she had plenty of time to observe the agents at work. Most seemed courteous and methodical, if a bit tired, but one agent, a tall, wiry man in his late 30s, with close-cropped hair and an officious frown, seemed to relish his authority in a manner that felt off. His name badge read Randall J. McKenna. Aisha noticed how Randall's eyes locked onto certain passengers more than others, lingering on them with a hawk-like suspicion. She couldn't confirm, but she had a hunch about his selective vigilance, and a chill crept over her. She was used to the subtle slights and pointed stares that sometimes greeted her in boardrooms or executive clubs. But security checkpoints had a different power dynamic entirely. She turned her attention away, quietly resolved to proceed with her typical stoicism. She ran a hand along the handle of her suitcase, mentally reviewing her schedule for the day. Whatever happened, she reminded herself she could handle it. As fate would have it, she ended up funneling into the lane where Randall supervised. Her heart tightened slightly. She told herself it was just another routine check, but something deeper told her trouble was brewing. "Good morning," she said politely when it was her turn. Randall stared at her passport for a second, then returned her greeting with a gruff nod. He asked her to remove her shoes, laptop, and any liquids. She complied without a word, placing them methodically into the plastic bins. Nothing about her was out of the ordinary. Yet his gaze held onto her photo ID longer than necessary before comparing it to her face. The tension in the air wrapped around them, both like a thick, invisible coil. He finally handed back her ID and motioned for her to step through the body scanner. She did so, forcing a small, polite smile. She was used to intense security protocols. It came with the territory of traveling frequently. "MAAM," Randall said, stepping from behind his station. "I'm going to need you to step aside for a random search." Aisha blinked. "May I ask why?" "Random search, ma'am," he repeated, more firmly this time, as if the phrase itself were an impenetrable shield against inquiry. A quiet hush fell over the travelers around them. Some craned their necks, possibly relieved it wasn't them. Others, noticing Aisha's composure and professional attire, looked confused. But no one spoke up. She nodded with resigned acceptance. All right. Aisha reasoned that a short search was not worth the confrontation, at least not yet. She needed to see how the rest of this process played out. She briefly glanced at the overhead security cameras, confirming her suspicion that they recorded everything. She was grateful for that. If any wrongdoing occurred, there'd be a record. Randall led her to a separate area, the so-called secondary screening. Another female TSA agent was stationed there. She looked apologetic but followed Randall's instructions, giving Aisha a standard pat-down. Aisha stayed quiet, arms outstretched, eyes forward. She reminded herself she'd soon be on her flight, plus she was effectively incognito. Randall, for his part, seemed to watch the search with an intensity that betrayed more than standard procedure. He was waiting, almost hoping for something to go wrong. Then came the moment he directed his gaze at Aisha's suitcase. "I need to open this," he announced, a note of anticipation in his voice. "Of course," Aisha said calmly, stepping aside. Randall lifted the suitcase onto a waist-high metal table. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he unzipped it. His eyes lit up at the sight of neatly packed compartments, each carefully arranged for her short trip. Without caution, he began rummaging through her clothes. Aisha tensed. "Please be careful," she said softly, maintaining an even tone. "Those are fragile items." Randall ignored her request. He continued poking around, yanking out a bag of toiletries, a small box containing her business proposals, and a meticulously folded blouse. The female TSA agent looked on nervously, but said nothing. A few passengers watched the scene unfold from a distance. Aisha's mind raced with swirling thoughts. Was Randall typically this rough with everyone's luggage? Or was this personal, fueled by some internal bias? She felt her heart pounding. She had come prepared to deal with incompetent staff, maybe a bit of rudeness. But malice was something else entirely. Randall stopped suddenly, his eyes fixated on a small velvet pouch tucked into a corner of the suitcase. He held it up for a moment, glancing at Aisha with a mixture of triumph and accusation. Then he shook it. Something inside clinked. "What's in here, ma'am?" His tone was borderline accusatory. "My late grandmother's jewelry," Aisha replied quietly, her gaze flicking from Randall's grip to his face. "It's sentimental. Please be gentle with it." Without waiting for her to finish, Randall ripped the pouch open, letting the jewelry spill onto the table with a metallic rattle gold bracelets, a delicate chain, a few small family heirlooms. A startled gasp escaped Aisha's lips. This wasn't just routine now, it was invasive and disrespectful. A momentary hush fell. Then Randall seemed to catch himself, as if he realized he'd gone too far. A few heads turned their way. The female agent inhaled sharply, but still did not intervene. "Just verifying, ma'am," Randall muttered, though he didn't sound remorseful. Aisha exhaled shakily. "Are we done?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly, not from fear, but from a swell of anger she fought to contain. Randall paused. eyeing the spilled jewelry on the table. He ran his gloved fingers over the items, as if searching for a hidden compartment. Finally, he moved on, rummaging through the rest of the suitcase with the same careless vigor. That was the moment Aisha decided if this got any worse, she'd have to reveal who she was. But she waited. She wanted to see the full scope of how far he would take it. The next item Randall fished out was a sealed envelope. Aisha knew its contents, important documents detailing a property in Charlotte she was investing in. He held it up, glaring at Aisha. "What's this?" he demanded. "Confidential documents," she said plainly. "They have nothing to do with airport security." He was about to tear it open when the other agent finally intervened. "Randall," she said softly, "I think we've gone far enough. We should let her repack." A flicker of irritation crossed Randall's face, but he reluctantly complied. He shoved the envelope back into the suitcase. Aisha's stomach churned as she watched him half crumple her neatly folded clothing. "You're free to go," Randall declared, stepping back from the table. "Next time, I suggest you keep your items more organized and less suspicious." That final comment struck a nerve. Aisha made a deliberate choice to remain calm. She took a slow breath, reminding herself that a public showdown would only heighten the tension. Carefully, she bent down and began repacking her belongings. She placed her grandmother's jewelry back into the velvet pouch, closing it gently. The hush that had fallen around them slowly dissipated as other travelers shuffled through security. Randall walked away to attend another passenger, apparently satisfied for the moment, but Aisha's heart hammered in her chest as she replayed the ordeal. This was more than simple overzealousness or random screening. She was convinced that Randall had singled her out. The question was, why? She decided that once she returned from her meeting, she would address the matter with the airport's head of security. She would do so, however, not as a disgruntled passenger, but as the owner of Trinity Bay International. In her mind, she rehearsed how that conversation would go. "I need to ensure my staff are following protocol," she thought. "This is unacceptable." She looked up at a camera near the corner of the ceiling, reassured that there was concrete evidence of everything that had just occurred. Gathering her bins, she walked to the end of the screening area, replaced her laptop in its case, and slipped her shoes back on. Her composure never cracked, even though her spirit smoldered with indignation. As she left the security zone, she glanced over her shoulder. Randall was already harassing another passenger, rummaging through their carry-on with the same officious glee. Aisha felt a pang of sympathy for that traveler, a mother traveling with her teenage daughter. She made a mental note to talk to them if she saw them after the flight. For now, she continued down the corridor, making her way to Gate B5. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of the day's turbulence. Fate, or perhaps karma, had a lot more in store, both for her and for Randall J. McKenna. Randall J. M. McKenna had joined the TSA nearly a decade ago. To most of his colleagues, he was a consistent, if somewhat joyless presence. He rarely smiled, never cracked jokes, and seemed to take a perverse satisfaction in his ability to inconvenience people. Rumor had it that he'd been passed over for multiple promotions due to lack of interpersonal skills. Truth be told, Randall carried resentments that seeped into every aspect of his job. Despite all the training sessions on cultural awareness and professionalism, he retained certain biases that he refused to confront. In his mind, certain passengers looked suspicious, and he believed it was his responsibility to root out wrongdoing before it could happen. Aisha Caldwell, with her poised confidence, good looks, and self-assurance, rubbed him the wrong way. From the moment he saw her, something about her presence, her refusal to appear submissive, ignited the worst in him. Deep down, he might not have consciously acknowledged it, but the seed of his prejudice had found fertile ground in her success and demeanor. After the morning rush subsided, Randall disappeared into the TSA staff lounge to grab a stale coffee from the vending machine. He fidgeted with his phone for a moment, scrolling through social media. His anxiety spiked momentarily. He found no mention of any incident at the airport yet. That was good. He didn't want a complaint going viral. He'd gone through this cycle before: random passenger singled out, mild pushback, and the occasional complaint filed. He relied on his ironically squeaky clean record and the fact that many travelers either didn't know how to file a complaint or decided it wasn't worth the trouble. But it wouldn't take many formal investigations before the TSA started paying attention to him in the wrong way. He stared at his reflection in the lounge's mirror. His uniform was slightly wrinkled and his name badge hung crooked. He tried to straighten it, but it wouldn't sit quite right. That small detail irked him, as if it symbolized his entire life being off-kilter. His phone buzzed a text from a coworker, warning him that a supervisor needed to speak with him about aggressive pat-down procedures. Randall's stomach churned. He brushed it off, deciding that it was just another mild scolding. He'd charm or bluff his way through it. He always did. Yet a sense of unease trailed him out of the lounge. Something about that morning's encounter with Aisha Caldwell felt different. He couldn't shake the sensation that he'd meddled with someone who wasn't going to stay quiet. It was like stepping on the tail of a lion, no immediate roar, but you knew it was coming. Aisha boarded her small commuter plane bound for Charlotte. Her heart still pounded from the confrontation with Randall, but she forced herself to focus on the upcoming business deal. She occupied a window seat, hoping the clouds might soothe her mood. Sometimes, glimpsing the world from above reminded her how small certain problems could be. Yet this time, the memory of Randall's sneer and the humiliating rummage of her belongings clung to her. As the plane ascended, she found herself gripping her grandmother's jewelry pouch in her jacket pocket, as if seeking comfort in its weight. The few hours to Charlotte gave her the space to plan out how she'd handle the matter upon her return. She considered her usual approach to conflict: direct, professional, but unyielding. She also knew that dealing with the TSA required a layered approach. There were federal guidelines, supervisors, and complicated jurisdictional boundaries. However, the fact remained that the airport itself was under her corporate umbrella. Eventually, if she escalated her concerns, changes would be made. She could not, and would not, allow such behavior to go unchecked in her establishment. Throughout the short flight, Aisha reviewed the documents in her envelope, the same ones. Randall had nearly torn open. They contained outlines of a new property acquisition, but her eyes kept skimming over the lines, mind wandering back to the morning's events. She recalled the startled faces of those around her, how a hush of tension fell as Randall publicly dismantled her suitcase. One passenger in the seat behind her recognized Aisha from a local business magazine and politely tapped her shoulder. "Excuse me," the woman whispered. "I was at the security line behind you." That was messed up. What happened back there? Aisha turned and saw a concerned face. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm okay, but it's not the first time I've experienced something like that." "Still," the passenger said, "I just want you to know, if you end up complaining, I'll back you up if they need a witness." Aisha's eyes warmed with gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot." She slipped her business card to the fellow passenger, a final silent acknowledgement that the matter was far from over. While Aisha was in Charlotte, Randall was summoned to the TSA supervisor's office at Trinity Bay International. The office was tucked away in a less traveled corridor of the airport post-security. Near the administrative section, posters on the walls showed motivational quotes about integrity, courtesy, and diligence. Randall knocked. His supervisor, a stocky man named Gerald Nicholson, gestured for him to come in. Gerald wore the standard TSA uniform, but had pinned 3 commendation medals onto his chest. "Take a seat," Gerald said curtly, steepling his fingers on the desk. Randall lowered himself into the chair, crossing his arms defensively. "What's this about?" Gerald's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've had more passenger complaints this month regarding your station. You know that random screenings are supposed to be exactly that, random. And even when random, they need to be done with courtesy and respect. Some travelers feel they're singled out, especially women of color." Randall tried to mask the flicker of annoyance. "I run thorough checks, sir. Isn't that the point?" Gerald leaned forward. "It's also the point to avoid potential lawsuits by not violating people's civil rights. Thoroughness and respect aren't mutually exclusive. If a traveler's singled out more often because you have a personal suspicion that goes beyond official guidelines, that's a problem." A muscle twitched in Randall's jaw. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Gerald sighed. "I'm giving you a formal warning. Any further complaints, especially those involving discrimination, and I'll have no choice but to recommend a more severe course of action. Do you understand?" Randall shrugged. "Understood." Gerald shook his head slowly. "Don't underestimate the seriousness of this, Randall. If the right passenger is targeted, and if they have the means or the influence to escalate, this could lead to immediate suspension or worse. So start following protocol. Carefully." Randall suppressed a smirk. "Yes, sir." He left the office with indignation coursing through his veins. Part of him was furious that he was being reprimanded. Another part worried that the next incident might truly end his career. He thought of the woman with the polished manner and the white blouse. What if she was the right passenger who had the means or influence to bring him down? He tried to brush off the nagging doubt, but it lingered. Meanwhile, in Charlotte, Aisha's meeting went smoother than expected. She had lunch with an influential real estate developer in a sleek skyscraper overlooking the city. They discussed expansions, co-investment opportunities, and philanthropic outreach programs. Despite her tension from the morning's incident, Aisha commanded the boardroom effortlessly. Her quiet confidence, tempered by years of experience, shone through as she navigated the negotiations. Still, a piece of her mind remained tethered to that humiliating experience in security. She wondered whether the female TSA agent who had performed the pat down ever considered speaking up. Aisha also thought of the mother and daughter she saw. What if they were subjected to similar treatment? By the time the lunch concluded, she'd forged a powerful new partnership that would benefit Trinity Bay International in expanding global flights. She could hardly wait to get back, not just for the excitement of unveiling new developments, but also to address the matter of Randall McKenna. On her way out of the skyscraper, she called her executive assistant, a sharp-eyed man named Brian Porter, back at Trinity Bay. "How's it going there?" Aisha asked, once Brian answered. "It's been fine," Brian replied, the hum of the administrative office buzzing softly in the background. "Are you on schedule to return soon?" "Yes." "I'll land around 2 this afternoon," Aisha said, glancing at her watch. "Any pressing issues?" Brian hesitated. "I received an unusual number of emails about an incident at security this morning. The head of security wants to talk to you strictly business, but it sounds like we have a problem with one of the TSA agents." Aisha took a slow breath. "All right, tell them I'll meet them right after I land. It's time we address this." The return flight to Trinity Bay felt shorter than usual, likely because Aisha's mind was fully occupied with the confrontation that awaited her. She was determined to handle this incident systematically and fairly. No matter how personal the ordeal felt, she needed to keep her composure. She was, after all, the highest stakeholder in the airport's future. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, she gathered her suitcase, still carefully rearranged from Randall's rummaging, and stepped off. Passengers bustled around her, anxious to reunite with families or make connecting flights. Aisha moved against the current, heading straight for the administrative offices. In the hallway leading to the offices, she crossed paths with a few employees who greeted her with smiles. They either didn't know of her ordeal or assumed she had come to address standard business. Upon reaching the head of security's office, she found Brian waiting for her outside. "He's ready for you," Brian said, opening the door. He glanced at her face, reading the tension, but said nothing more. Inside, the head of security, a calm and collected man named Martin Delgado, stood to greet her. He extended a firm handshake. "Caldwell, good to see you back." "Good to see you too," she replied politely. "Thank you for making the time." They both sat at the desk, Brian standing quietly near the doorway. "I take it this is about the incident this morning?" Martin asked, folding his hands. "I've already received preliminary reports." "Yes," Aisha confirmed. "I was singled out for a random search by one of our TSA agents, Randall McKenna. The search was invasive, disrespectful, and borderline destructive to my personal property." A flicker of concern crossed Martin's brow. "I sincerely apologize, Miss Caldwell. The TSA are federal employees, as you know, but we coordinate closely with them. We pride ourselves on a smooth passenger experience. This shouldn't happen." Aisha nodded. "I want to be clear, I'm not seeking special treatment for myself. I'd be equally concerned if this happened to any passenger. I believe he specifically targeted me based on bias. I've seen him singled out mothers, people of color, and I suspect it's more than just a one-off. I came today not just as a traveler, but as the owner of this airport." Martin inhaled slowly, measuring his words. "We do have some autonomy in addressing staff misconduct, but TSA is a federal agency. We'll need to follow specific guidelines to file an official complaint. However, your position does give us additional leverage to demand a swift and thorough investigation." She glanced at Brian, who nodded in agreement. "We have the security footage, Miss Caldwell, and there are a few passenger statements, one from a woman who was behind you in line. She said she'd be willing to testify if necessary." A brief warmth settled over Aisha. She remembered the passenger on the plane. "That's reassuring. Let's get the footage, the statements, and everything else in order," she said. "I have no intention of letting this go." Martin opened a file on his computer, turning the screen slightly so she could watch a snippet of the security footage. There, in grainy but clear detail, she saw Randall rummaging through her suitcase, yanking out the pouch, and letting her jewelry clatter onto the table. The angle also caught glimpses of his facial expressions. He looked coldly satisfied, a detail that made Aisha's blood simmer anew. She exhaled slowly, pushing down her anger. "I want formal action taken," she said, turning her gaze back to Martin. "I expect you to coordinate with the TSA supervisor, and I'd like to be present when we confront him." Martin nodded solemnly. "Absolutely, we'll move quickly." That same afternoon, Randall was back at his post when his supervisor, Gerald Nicholson, approached him again. Only this time, Gerald wasn't alone. Martin Delgado accompanied him, along with Aisha Caldwell and Brian Porter in civilian attire. The group advanced like an official procession, turning heads among the other TSA agents. Randall's heart plummeted to his stomach when he recognized Aisha. In that instant, he realized the precariousness of his situation. A swirl of confusion and dread overtook him. Why was she walking with them? Gerald cleared his throat. "Randall, we need to speak with you in the conference room now." Randall shot furtive glances around the checkpoint. A few travelers were diverted to other lines. Other TSA agents paused to watch with curiosity. With a stiff nod, Randall followed the group to the conference room. Tension crackled in the air as they all filed inside. Martin Delgado gestured for Randall to take a seat at one end of the table. Aisha and Brian remained standing. Gerald Nicholson swallowed. "Randall, do you recognize Miss Caldwell?" Randall let his gaze dart to Aisha. "Yes, she was a passenger this morning." Gerald nodded. "She's also the principal investor in Trinity Bay International, effectively the airport's owner." Randall's face went ashen. He stared at Aisha, who looked back with an unreadable expression. He fumbled for words. I had no idea." Aisha stepped forward, her voice calm yet steely. "That's not the point, Mr. McKenna. Even if I was just another passenger, what you did was unacceptable. You not only violated my privacy, but you also damaged my belongings and treated me disrespectfully." Randall gaped. I was just following procedure." Martin Delgado pulled out a tablet, displaying a paused screenshot from the security footage. In it, Randall hovered over the table, jewelry scattered about. "This is not proper procedure," Martin stated bluntly. "You were rough with her suitcase and personal effects. Multiple witnesses also attest that you seemed to single her out." Sweat beaded on Randall's forehead. He didn't have a defense prepared. He hadn't expected to face the passenger again, let alone the airport owner. Gerald cleared his throat, looking tense. "Randall, you've been cautioned before about your approach. We now have direct evidence and formal complaints. This is no longer just a warning." Aisha studied Randall's expression, caught between fear and stubbornness. "I want to make one thing clear," she said. "I'm well aware that TSA has its protocols. My intention isn't to sabotage those protocols. But we don't tolerate harassment or discrimination in this airport, especially when it compromises our passengers' rights and safety." Randall tried to salvage some semblance of defense. Sometimes it's easy to get suspicious, especially when you're under pressure. We handle thousands of passengers." He halted mid-sentence, aware he was rambling. Aisha's cold, unwavering gaze seemed to pierce him. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his actions had real consequences, not just for travelers, but for his own career. Gerald pressed his lips together. "Randall, effective immediately, I'm placing you on suspension pending an official review by TSA management. Depending on the outcome, you may be terminated." The finality of those words hung in the air, a quiet echo of justice. Randall opened his mouth, then shut it, unable to form a coherent plea. The humiliation was tangible. "I suggest you collect your personal items," Martin Delgado added softly. Randall had no choice. He left the conference room, pale-faced and trembling, the stares of his co-workers following him like a silent condemnation. The very authority he'd wielded over travelers for years was now stripped away, undone in a single day by the woman he least expected to hold power over him. After Randall departed, the tension in the conference room eased somewhat. Martin Delgado slumped into a chair, exhaling deeply. Gerald Nicholson looked uneasy, but relieved that the matter had been addressed before any lawsuits or media fiascos erupted. Aisha set her suitcase down and turned to both men. "Thank you for your swift action, but I'd also like to ensure that any deeper issues are resolved. Are there policies in place to prevent this from recurring with other agents?" Gerald nodded. "We do training and refreshers, but I think more extensive oversight is needed. Agents like Randall give the entire team a bad reputation, and that's not fair to the ones who do their jobs diligently." Martin Delgado added, "We can implement additional audits on who gets randomly searched and why. TSA has some internal guidelines, but I'll collaborate with them to see if we can add more transparent protocols." Aisha offered a measured smile. "That would be helpful. I want Trinity Bay International to stand out for its efficiency and fairness, not become a headline for discrimination." They continued discussing the next steps: formal complaint procedures, staff retraining, and communication strategies. By the end, Aisha felt some optimism. Perhaps something good could come from her unsettling experience, better training, safer procedures, fewer travelers singled out for superficial reasons. A few days later, word of the incident spread through local news outlets, fueled by social media posts. One traveler who had witnessed Aisha's search had recorded a short clip on their phone, though prohibited in certain security areas. The passenger's vantage point had been from behind the glass partition. The clip showed Randall manhandling the contents of Aisha's suitcase. The local news picked up the story, headlining it as TSA agent at Trinity Bay accused of harassing airport's new owner. It quickly went viral, especially among communities tired of seeing black women disrespected or profiled while traveling. Several prominent voices on social media praised Aisha's composure, calling her a role model of grace under fire. Others criticized the TSA, pushing for more transparency and accountability. Many posted their own stories of unfair treatment, building a groundswell of conversation about airport security. Aisha, who had always been somewhat private about her personal life, found herself thrust into the public eye. Journalists wanted interviews. Passengers recognized her in the terminal. She navigated the attention with dignity, emphasizing that her primary goal was to improve the travel experience for everyone. In a press conference organized at Trinity Bay, Aisha stood at a podium with Martin Delgado and several TSA representatives. Microphones jutted forward, cameras flashed. It's unfortunate that it took an incident like this to highlight a long-standing issue, Aisha began, voice projecting clearly. But I stand before you with confidence that Trinity Bay International will commit to transparency, fairness, and accountability. We're working with the TSA to ensure every passenger, regardless of race or background, receives respectful treatment. Her words resonated. The press conference concluded with applause, though Aisha knew the real work lay ahead, implementing better policies, ensuring no other Randall McKenna stepped into that role, and continuing to expand the airport's capabilities. For Randall McKenna, the repercussions of his actions set in with breathtaking speed. The day after his suspension, he woke up to the disconcerting sight of a local news van parked across the street from his modest, beige-sided apartment complex. Reporters had caught wind of the security footage in which he was seen yanking open Aisha Caldwell's suitcase and carelessly scattering her grandmother's jewelry. Now they wanted his side of the story, or a sensational reaction they could plaster all over their nightly broadcasts. When he peered out the window, heart pounding, Randall saw a small group of neighbors gossiping by the curb. He caught a glimpse of Miss S. Klein from upstairs, who had once been friendly enough to share a holiday fruitcake with him, shaking her head in dismay while talking to another tenant. They spoke in hushed tones, throwing sidelong glances at the news van. Randall closed his curtains, hoping they hadn't noticed him looking. The phone calls started soon after. A few from former TSA colleagues, mostly short expressions of shock or awkward concern. One friend from high school claimed to be on his side, but when Randall tried to explain, the man cut him off. "Look, you messed with the airport's new owner. You're done, man. Maybe it's time to lay low for a while." Then he hung up. Randall spent those first few days glued to social media, flipping between dread and denial. The story trended in local circles. TSA, agent suspended for harassing airport's new owner. Comment sections brimmed with outrage and schadenfreude in near equal measure. Some folks sympathized, saying that TSA protocols can be strict and ambiguous, but most comments skewered him, accusing him of racism, power-tripping, or both. One scathing post put it succinctly: "When your prejudice outruns your common sense, karma will find you, no matter how high you think you stand." The final blow arrived exactly 1 week after his suspension. A stiff, official-looking envelope from TSA management lay waiting in his mailbox. Sitting at his cramped kitchen table, beneath the fluorescent light that flickered ominously, he tore it open with trembling fingers. The words leapt from the page, termination effective immediately. The letter recapped how footage and witness statements had revealed a pattern of unwarranted, overly aggressive searches disproportionately applied to black travelers and other minorities. There was no severance, no chance for rehire, no illusions about a second chance. Randall stared at the letter, the lump in his throat so thick he could barely swallow. Memories swarmed him, the day he'd first gotten the TSA job, feeling a sense of stability. For the first time in years, the small pride he took in wearing the uniform, the promotions he had hoped for but never received. Every piece of that life slipped through his fingers like sand. Humiliation followed him everywhere he went. When he ventured to the grocery store, he noticed side glances from people who might have recognized his face from the news. He tried to line up interviews for other security-related jobs, but those ended abruptly once prospective employers dug into his recent history. Even private security firms were wary he was too radioactive for their risk-averse hiring policies. Desperate for income, Randall turned to rideshare driving. He leased a slightly newer model sedan and spent long hours shuttling strangers around the city. The job came with its own indignities. More than once, a passenger would climb into the back seat, recognize him, and either grow uncomfortably silent or immediately strike up a pointed conversation. "Aren't you the TSA agent who got fired for messing with that black airport owner?" one brash teenager asked, filming Randall with his phone. The clip ended up on social media. Randall's rating plummeted. During his late-night shifts, a quiet loneliness settled over him. Parking outside dingy bars or waiting at the airport's rideshare queue, he had too much time to reflect on his downfall. He thought about the scathing look Aisha Caldwell had given him in that conference room, more disappointment than pure fury. He remembered how she'd refused to shrink under his authority, choosing instead to calmly dismantle his entire career with the truth. At first, his bitterness burned hot. He convinced himself he was the victim, that the blame lay with overzealous supervisors and sensationalist media. But slowly, as the weeks crept by, cracks formed in his self-righteous armor. He would replay the moment he ripped open Aisha's velvet pouch, scattering her grandmother's keepsakes. He'd stare at the memory of her eyes, how they flashed with shock and pain. He recalled how travelers in line had stared at him, some in disbelief, others in barely contained anger. Over and over, he returned to the moment he could have chosen respect instead of hostility. He realized he had, in fact, singled her out not purely for security reasons, but because something in him resented her confidence and poise. As that truth sank in, the burn of guilt joined his bitterness, forging a remorse he didn't quite know how to handle. Late at night, after tossing and turning in bed, he found himself scouring job boards and reading articles about fighting workplace bias. He read about people who had changed their perspectives and redeemed themselves. The stories seemed remote and idealistic, and he wondered if it was possible for someone like him. When he drifted off to sleep, his dreams fused with real memories in an endless loop, replaying the same humiliating scene, Aisha's suitcase torn open, his gloved hands rummaging, the snap of the pouch as jewelry tumbled out. He'd awaken sweating, his pulse thrumming in his ears, a hollow feeling sitting heavy in his stomach. Each morning, he returned to driving. Each afternoon, he struggled not to resent every passenger who rated him less than 5 stars. At times, he imagined that the entire city was whispering, pointing at him as the bigoted TSA agent who got exactly what he deserved. As weeks bled into months, Randall couldn't deny that the life he'd once had was gone for good. In his darker, more honest moments, he admitted that perhaps it should be. No measure of self-pity could erase what he'd done to those travelers who deserved better, especially the one who turned out to be the most powerful person in the airport. If there was any consolation, it was that his story had become a living cautionary tale. On forums and in news segments, people would say, "Don't let your prejudice cost you everything. Look what happened to Randall McKenna. He never dreamed he'd be infamous, but there he was, and he had only himself to blame. The higher you think you stand, the farther you can fall." And for Randall, that fall felt endless. Back at Trinity Bay, Aisha threw herself into airport improvements. She allocated funds for better technology at security checkpoints to streamline scanning, reducing the need for manual searches. She also backed new staff training programs focusing on implicit bias and customer service. Gerald Nicholson and Martin Delgado, both motivated by the incident, worked diligently to ensure these measures were implemented smoothly. Aisha even spearheaded a mentorship program for local youth, introducing them to careers in aviation security, air traffic control, and airport administration. Opportunities foster respect and unity, she explained in a memo to staff. When people understand each other's backgrounds, it breaks down barriers. Her philanthropic side shone through: scholarship funds for aspiring aviation professionals, community outreach events, and more. The local press lauded her for turning a negative personal experience into a catalyst for wide-reaching positive change. And in private, Aisha took moments to process the trauma of the invasive search. She spoke with close friends, ensuring she didn't bottle up the fear and anger. Through vulnerability, she found renewed strength. Months later, on a busy Friday afternoon, Aisha walked through the arrivals hall of Trinity Bay, returning from yet another business trip. She saw a small scuffle near the curb where rideshares picked up passengers. A driver was loading someone's luggage into the trunk. When Aisha glanced at the driver's face, her breath caught. It was Randall McKenna, looking visibly older and gaunt, but unmistakable. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Randall turned away, hurriedly helping another passenger. An odd pang resonated in Aisha's chest recognition, tinged with the weight of memory. She might have simply moved on, ignoring him, but something compelled her to approach. She wheeled her suitcase closer, stopping a polite distance away. Randall finished with his current fare and shut the trunk. Sensing her presence, he lifted his gaze. He froze, as if uncertain whether to run or apologize. The corners of his mouth twitched in something akin to shame. "Miss Caldwell," he mumbled, barely audible. "Hello, Mr. McKenna," she said softly, scanning his face. Tension hung in the air between them, the memory of that humiliating morning suspended like a ghost. Randall lowered his eyes. For a long moment, no words passed. Eventually he said, "I lost my job. I deserved that. I'm sorry." Aisha studied him, noticing the exhaustion etched on his features. There was no triumph in her expression, only a resolute calm. "I appreciate the apology," she replied. "I hope you've learned something from the experience." He nodded stiffly, words failing him. A few other travelers hovered nearby, waiting for their rides. Aisha glanced at them, then back at Randall. "Do better," she said quietly, concluding the conversation. "For your own sake." She turned and walked away. In the reflection of the glass doors, she caught one last glimpse of him, standing there with slumped shoulders. A swirl of emotions settled over her: pity, relief, closure. Under Aisha's leadership, Trinity Bay International expanded rapidly. New gates opened to accommodate international flights, more local jobs were created, and passenger satisfaction ratings climbed. The incident that had once threatened the airport's reputation became a footnote in a larger story of redemption and progress. TSA staffing improved. Training modules were revised to prevent future profiling. Travelers who passed through commented on the courteousness and efficiency of the staff. It wasn't perfect, no airport was, but the effort and the results were tangible. Meanwhile, Aisha's personal brand soared. She was invited to speak at conferences about leadership, entrepreneurship, and combating bias. She never shied away from sharing her experiences, including the humiliating morning that catalyzed significant changes. The memory of that day remained a source of both pain and motivation. Pain because of what she endured, motivation because of how it underscored the importance of raising one's voice. She had the rare power to enforce reform, and she used it. In many ways, her story became a modern parable about prejudgment and the hidden authority some people carry. It demonstrated how misguided discrimination could backfire spectacularly, and how the path to atonement lay in recognizing each person's intrinsic value, whether or not they owned an airport. Trinity Bay thrived, standing not just as a monument to Aisha's business acumen, but also as a testament to the possibility of turning adversity into improvement. If there was a moral to be gleaned, it was this: respect should never hinge on status or appearance, and arrogance, fueled by bias, often reaps a bitter harvest. One evening, months after the incident, Aisha strolled through the terminal she had helped transform. She wore a casual blazer and jeans, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. She passed newly installed artwork celebrating the region's diversity, colorful murals representing different cultures, commissioned by local artists. Nearby, a group of children from a community program she funded were touring the control tower with bright-eyed enthusiasm. She paused at the security checkpoint. It was streamlined now, lines moving more swiftly. Smiling agents greeted passengers with courtesy. The entire area felt brighter, more welcoming. Aisha stopped, letting her gaze linger on the spot where Randall had once opened her suitcase. In her mind, she could still hear the clatter of her grandmother's precious jewelry hitting the table. That memory no longer rattled her with anger. Instead, she felt a sense of achievement at how far the airport had come and how far she had come too. Adversity had sparked a change that rippled beyond just her personal sense of justice. A nearby traveler recognized her and offered a warm smile, stepping aside to let her pass first. She politely declined the special treatment, insisting she was just another passenger. And in some ways, that was true. She believed in bridging the gap between owner and customer, authority and public. The airport was everyone's space, a crossroads of humanity. As she walked on, she felt the subtle vibrations of planes landing and taking off. The ceiling lights reflected off the polished floors, giving the entire space a soft, golden glow. It felt alive, bustling with journeys just begun or nearing completion. New stories were born here every day, some ending in happy reunions, others starting new chapters in faraway lands. For Aisha, the ordeal with Randall McKenna had been a pivotal chapter in her own story. She had faced discrimination, responded with dignity, and triggered institutional change. She had discovered the power of her voice and the responsibility that came with it. Yes, it had been painful. Yes, the scars remained. But from those scars, something even better had emerged. She continued toward her gate, looking forward to her next flight and whatever lay beyond. In the end, that was the true spirit of an airport: forward motion, endless possibilities, and the promise that no single moment of indignity could ever ground you forever. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey through Trinity Bay International, where a single moment of discrimination became the catalyst for sweeping change. Aisha Caldwell's composure and determination proved that no one, not even a TSA agent with unchecked bias, can stand in the way of dignity and justice. We watched Randall McKenna's downfall as the ultimate example of how prejudice can backfire, and we also witness the power of turning a painful experience into a springboard for transformation. This story reminds us that we all have the potential to make a difference, whether we own an airport or simply fly through one. If you found inspiration, motivation, or even a little well-deserved satisfaction from this tale, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience, triumph, and hard-earned karma to life. Thank you for watching, and safe travels to you all.